Buenas tardes, maestros, ¿cómo están? Un gusto tenerlos también por este medio. El día de hoy nos estamos reuniendo por un motivo muy especial. El día de hoy tenemos nuestro seminario internacional de inglés. El tema que vamos a tratar es English for a New Digital World. Estará a cargo de ponentes internacionales. Tenemos también presente a nuestro coordinador nacional de inglés, el doctor Jesse Reyes, a quien le damos la bienvenida y conocemos un poco acerca de esta temática. Les comento, hoy más que nunca sabemos que estar al tanto de la tecnología y trabajar también el idioma inglés a distancia es todo un reto para muchos maestros. Consideramos muy importante estos espacios donde podemos nosotros aprovechar al máximo la experiencia de repente desde la vista de otros países en el desarrollo del idioma inglés a distancia. Es por ello que esta cita especial a la cual todos ustedes son bienvenidos es para trabajar ello y determinar también en gran medida ese cambio que debemos de dar a través de la virtualidad en el manejo del idioma inglés. Entonces, Gese, te damos la bienvenida. Muchísimas gracias. ¿Cómo estás, Gese?
¿Qué tal, Giselle? Muchas gracias por la cálida bienvenida. Muchas gracias a cada uno de los presentes por haberse conectado. En efecto, sean bienvenidos a este seminario internacional y vamos a empezar nuestro primer día con la ponencia de 4D Model. The 4D Model for Quality Language Learning is a conceptual framework that classifies the second language teaching and learning process into the 4Ds. Interactional dynamics in L2, output dynamics, motivational dynamics, and tech dynamics. It is designed to optimize the lesson planning process to achieve the highest degree of efficacy in classroom instruction. In terms of classroom practice, it serves as a guide for teachers to maximize their student success. At the same time, I have the honor to introduce Mr. Leonardo Mercado. Mr. Leonardo Mercado is originally from Queens, New York. Leo has been in the educational field for more than 25 years. As a language program administrator, he has worked as an academic coordinator, academic branch manager, project manager, test center administrator, and director of studies. Over the years, he has led large-scale projects to create and implement diverse e-learning platforms, as well as several nationwide projects with Peru's Ministry of Education and other entities. He is now an entrepreneur who is heading his own professional consultancy firm, NYC Learning Solutions. He has also been certified as a language proficiency rater, a specialist by the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Language, US, Peace Corps, College Board, University of Cambridge, and University of Michigan. Leo holds a master's degree in education with a specialization in curriculum and instruction from the University of Phoenix. He also holds an executive MBA with a specialization in project management from the New York Institute of Technology. His main interests include technology for the language classroom, language assessment, teacher education, and professional development. Leo, welcome.
I have the, can you hear me now? I am
Yes.
unmuted. Okay, very good. So thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'd like to start off by thanking Greenwich and Norma for the kind invitation, for the opportunity to be here with you this afternoon. And indeed, we're going to start off this international event with a talk, a presentation on a topic that is relevant to us today, especially in the virtual age, especially in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm referring specifically to the topic, successful teaching with the 4Ds. Now, this is in response to the idea on the part of many who believe that teaching English or any other second language is something that practically anyone can do. And I think we know a little better. I think we know it's not that easy. And it hasn't been made any easier with the pandemic. But the teaching and learning process can be conceptualized in a simple, practical manner so that teachers and students and educational institutions can seek out and achieve success time and time again. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about a framework that hopefully you will find to be very practical and beneficial in your daily work now in your virtual classes, and of course, the day when you return to your face-to-face classes in the physical classroom as well. Okay, so let us begin. We've got a lot of work to do today. So we're going to talk a little bit about history very briefly to establish the context. Then we're going to focus on this notion of success. What is success, right? And then we're going to dig deep into the 4D paragon, the model. What are the 4Ds and how can they help you be successful in your teaching? And hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. Okay, so let's start. So if we go back in history, people have been learning languages for the longest time, centuries, even thousands of years. And throughout all this time, there's always been this search to try to find the ideal way to learn language, a second language, the best way, the most efficient way, the one that can bring the magical results that people often seek. And along this process, we've encountered successes and failures. We've learned many valuable lessons, things that work and things that don't work. There's been research done, especially in the last few decades, in the last 40 or 50 years, to see how people actually learn and how they can learn well and efficiently. And we are where we are today, which is why this particular talk is so relevant. Today, we're going to talk about where we are and how that can help you. So again, moving forward, just to review a little bit, our understanding of the different approaches and methods and all these attempts that people have made to try to find the ideal way to learn a language. Let's review a few of the approaches and methods and some of these practices that we've tried in the past that still help us today, because again, as I said before, we've learned many lessons. So look at the top of the screen, and we're going to do this very quickly. Take a look at the top of the screen. You're going to see a variety of different methods and approaches and practices that have been used in the past and are, to some extent, are still put into practice today. And I'd like you to look at the statements below. And I want you to match the method or the approach or the practice with the statement. So let us look at the first one. I will read these aloud, and in your minds or on a piece of paper, try to match the statement to the method or the approach. So number one, this or it upheld the belief that lessons had to be designed to minimize the possibility of having students make errors. So which one is that? Is that the lexical approach, the audiolingual method, the natural approach, grammar translation, task-based learning, or Suggestipedia? Okay, that's number one. So try to write the initials so that you can have a mental note. Let's look at number two. It sought to create an ideal environment for learning, placing the students at ease as much as possible. Okay, again, try to find the match. Now, one of them doesn't match anything. So remember, look, we have 5 statements and we have 6 options. So one of them is a distractor, so be careful. Number 3, it focuses not on grammar, but on the learning of the countless number of language chunks we often use in everyday communication. Okay, that's number 3. Try to match it. Number 4, it never intended to get students to use the second language, but rather understand it so the content could be discussed in the first language. Okay, that doesn't sound like something we would do today, huh? Try to find the match. And then let's look at the last one. It has students work on something until it is completed, so the outcome represents the culmination of a collaborative process. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'll give you 30 seconds, and then we'll take a quick look. And again, the point here is we're looking at all of the things that we've tried in the past, things that have taught us methods and approaches and practices, philosophies that have taught us many lessons, okay, that have helped us arrive at where we are today. Okay, 10 more seconds, and then we'll take a look at the answers. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's see what we're going to get. Okay, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's take a look. There we go. So number 1, this notion of avoiding the possibility of having students make errors, designing the activities from scratch, the content, the lessons. That would be the audiolingual method. There was a lot of choral repetition, a lot of error correction or corrective feedback, what we call corrective feedback today. The second one, Suggestopedia, this notion of working to create a nice learning environment to put the students at ease, music, comfortable setting, a comfortable setting in the furniture. Well, we still do that today, right? We try to do that today. Many of us still use music in our classes. That's a remnant from the Suggestopedia days back in the 70s. It focuses not on grammar, but on the learning of the countless number of language chunks. And that would be the lexical approach from Michael Lewis back in the 90s, this idea that, it would be best to focus on lexis, language, expressions, things that we say a lot, very common. How you doing? Uh, uh, Nice to meet you. Language chunks that go together we use very often. And number 4, grammar translation. This goes back hundreds of years, if not thousands, where we tried to learn the second language just for understanding the input so that we could comment on it in our first language. And finally, the task-based learning. Dr. David Noonan is a major proponent of task-based learning, teaching and learning. And so this is something that we still put into practice today. So these are all philosophies and tasks and approaches and methods that have taught us many things, many lessons. And the question is, where are we today? Well, today we are now what Theodore Rogers and Jack Richards would call the post-methods era. Okay, so we're no longer trying to adhere to one method, one approach, one ideal way, the only way, a unique formula, magical formula. No, we're working more on principles. Okay, principles that are long-standing. Principles are impervious to the effects of time. So number 1, students have to be motivated. Number 2, there has to be input and output. Both are important. The right input leads to the right kind of output. 3, adaptability. We need to be able to adapt our classes according to our groups, the students that we have, their needs. 4, creativity. We have to be able to be creative, no longer stick to a prescribed content or curriculum, but have the flexibility to be able to innovate according to the circumstances. And number 5, we always have to have clear goals and outcomes. We have to try to make sure that the outcomes match the efforts in class. Okay, so those are key principles. Regardless of what we try to do in class, those are principles that we always try to achieve or adhere to. How do we do that? We look at needs analyses. So we look at the means, needs analyses. How do we learn about what our students want? What do we expect? Study materials, quality study materials, textbooks, ebooks, interactive workbooks, online, digital workbooks and materials, learning management systems, LMSs, etc. The learning environment, we try to create the right learning environment, whether it's in face-to-face classes or online. Technology, of course, a tool that we must resort to, a resource. And finally, of course, the teacher. The teacher will always be a major component or major element in the success or failure of the learning process. Okay, so these are things to think about, and as this gentleman is doing, he's happy about what he's done. We all want to be successful as teachers. We want to succeed. We want to be happy at the end of our lessons. How do we do that? So again, we often talk about student motivation, but we also tend to forget that teachers need to be motivated too. And one great motivator is success. Okay, being successful as you teach is something that can really motivate us and can really bring up our spirits and can lead us to keep on trudging on until the next lesson, until we do it all over again, right? Again, a lot of people think teaching is easy. You don't agree with that, right? Of course not. Every time we get together with a group of students, we have to create magic every time. That is not something an accountant has to do. That's not something that, a public servant or clerk has to do. That's not something that a lawyer has to do. A lawyer has to create magic every time they go to court, but teachers have to create magic every time we get together with our students. That's why it's so challenging, and we have to be motivated. So success, how do we ensure success? How can we bring about success? That's why we're here today. That's why I'm talking about this topic, because I want to provide you with a practical, easy, simple way to increase the possibility or the probability that you will succeed time and time again, okay? So The formula to success. If we're going to use an acronym, we can look at this idea of teaching. All right, so teach according to your expertise and your knowledge, your strategies, engage your students, get them interested, captivate them, okay? Catch all their attention, activate their background knowledge, okay? Activate the interlanguage, the language that they have in their minds that they've learned so far and that they can use to communicate with the students in class and also in the outside world. Help them consolidate, what they know and what they understand through the right kind of practice. And finally, harmonize their expectations, okay, their needs with the learning outcomes. Okay, so you have to find a way to harmonize those elements together. Okay, again, it's not easy, but if we follow, a certain approach, we should be in good shape. Okay, and we should be happy while we're doing it. Okay, so look, before I introduce the 4D paragon, let's look at a few statements, and I want you to tell me which ones you think might be true. Okay, so again, this is very important. Which one of these do you think might be true? All right, so let's take a look. Number one, L2 input does not have an impact on L2 output. Okay, so do you think that is true? It's not true. You can type your answers if you want. Number one. Number two, brain falls asleep when physical or mental activity is lacking. Okay, so is that true or is that false? Can the brain fall asleep? Is that even possible? Number three, we should push students to participate as much as possible. Okay, do you agree with that? Do you agree that some people believe that, some people don't? Some researchers have looked into this. What do you think? Do you think this is true or false? Number four, students can learn just fine if teachers follow the textbook. Okay, so we know that the textbooks are important tools. Now, is that true? Can students just learn just fine if the teachers follow the textbook? And number five, students don't need technology to learn a second language. Okay, so these are 5 statements I'd like you to think about for a second. Do you think they're true or not true? All right, we're going to see in the course of the forthcoming minutes, we're going to see to what extent they might be true, they might not be true. The presentation will answer these questions. Okay. All right. Let's look at the 4D paragon. Now I'm going to say something you might think it's a little controversial, maybe not. But listen, we, like I said, the beginning of this presentation, everybody wants to succeed. All of us teachers, we want to succeed. Every time we get together with our students, we want to feel good. We want to see our students learn. We want to see our students do well, right? What I'm offering today is one alternative to help you get there. All you have to do is make sure that you have these 4 things happen in your lessons, and you will be in a very good position to succeed time and time again. Okay? So what are the 4 Ds? Motivating dynamics, kinesthetic dynamics, tech dynamics, and L2 output dynamics. This is important. So if you keep these 4 dynamics, these 4 pillars of the teaching and learning process in mind as you plan your lessons and as you teach your lessons, and it doesn't matter if it's in a face-to-face class or if it's online, it applies to both equally, okay? Then your students will have a much better chance of succeeding, and so will you. And as a result, with success, your students' motivation will continue to increase, and so will yours. And you'll see the results. There's nothing like, sometimes we hear a lot of rules and everything. It's best to keep things simple. So what do I mean by the 4D paragon? Let's take a look. Let's start with motivational dynamics, okay? Now, we all know that without motivation, students can't learn, right? So students have to be motivated. So essentially, motivational dynamics means these are the things that you do the actions that you take, the decisions that you make that help your students, that lead your students to be engaged, to be interested, to be captivated, and to pay attention. Okay? So this is everything you do. I'll tell you one thing. One thing that you can do, I think we all do that. Well, not all of us. Some of us can't. We're not good at it. It can be something as simple as telling a joke in class. Now, how many of you tell jokes in class? How many of you try to be funny? So try to say something funny in class. Okay. Some of you do. A lot of people do. Some people don't. Okay. Being jovial, being humorous, making your students laugh contributes to motivation. Remember, the challenge here is trying to make sure that your students are happy where they are every time they meet with you and their classmates. They're happy to be in class. They are enjoying the experience. Yeah. And so being humorous is part of it, part of the formula. Yeah. So just make sure if you're going to tell jokes, make sure they're funny. Okay. Just make sure they're funny. So that's number one. You have to have charisma as a teacher. You must be charismatic. You have to be a people person. In order to succeed, you have to smile, be happy, be in a good mood. Yeah. This is very important because if you're not, then the students can perceive it. The students can tell. And you also have to have a positive disposition. It means you have to go in with the right attitude, right? You're in there to help your students learn. And once you close your door, if this is a physical classroom, once you close your door, you leave all the problems and all your worries outside, okay? And if it's a virtual classroom, once you connect, once you activate, once you go live, you forget about everything else, okay? And you focus on your students and you focus on helping them learn and helping them have a good time. You forget about all the problems. No bad mood, no nothing, okay? No concerns, no worries. Okay, so first of all, the teacher is very important in that sense. Second, if you want to keep your students motivated, you have to make sure that you know their needs, you know their expectations. Now, many years ago, I remember the first time I went to a TESOL International conference. It was in Vancouver. And I was new to the field. I was a new teacher, relatively new. I'd been teaching for about 4 or 5 years, but I still felt new. I didn't know that much. And I was online, I was in the line and I was listening to a group of people in front of me, and they were talking about a needs analysis that they had, each one had just conducted. They said, "Hey, yeah, listen, I did my needs analysis," and then the other person said, "Yeah, this needs analysis. Yeah, I did mine, and wow, I changed my teaching." And I was like, "What is this needs analysis thing?" Eventually, I learned that a needs analysis is a basic practice, an essential practice that unfortunately, even in the year 2021, many teachers still don't do, and many institutions don't do. So for example, it's almost like jumping into a car. When you go into a car and you're about to drive, don't you put on your seatbelt? Even when you don't drive, even when you're a passenger, the first thing you do is you put on your seatbelt. Well, the needs analysis is the first thing you should do when you start teaching a new group. You have to ask them a number of questions. Why are they studying English? What do they like in an English class? What kinds of activities do they enjoy? What kinds of activities don't they enjoy? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What do they want to see from you, and what do they want to see from the course? These are all things that we need to ask, okay, if we want to get off to a good start. The more we know about their needs, the more we're familiar with what they expect, the better the chance that we will do well in serving our students and helping them accomplish their goals. Okay? So for example, at the last Language Institute where I used to work, I worked at Euridiomas. I was a director there for almost 5 years. I implemented a mass scale with my team. We implemented a mass needs analyses framework whereby all the students had to answer needs analysis on the first day of class. Okay? This was every single course, basic, intermediate, advanced, all the courses. So our teachers knew. They would look, check on the phone, check on the file. It was all electronic. and they could see what the students wanted, what they expected, what they needed to do. And then you can adapt your class and motivate your students because they can see that you really care. You just don't want to teach a book. You want to adapt the book and you want to adapt the lessons to what they really want to hear, what they want to do, and what they expect. So that's going to motivate your students. Number one, okay, so do a needs analysis. It doesn't have to be extensive. It doesn't have to have 50 questions, but it should allow you to get the information you need to understand your students better and to connect better, to establish that rapport. Number two, make sure it's fun, it's enjoyable, your lessons are enjoyable, okay, that they're engaging. And number three, have variety. Textbooks are great, Norma books are fantastic, Greenwich books are fantastic, but it's always good to give it a creative twist. Look at the content, look at the activities. Is this going to work tomorrow? Yes or no? Is it going to work as fully as it can? And if not, can I spice it up a little bit with a little creativity? Can I adapt the activity? Maybe I can insert my own activity. Variety is always good because if students figure out a pattern, if you're always doing a certain sequence and the activities in a certain order, and if you do things a certain way all the time, it gets a little mundane, right? It gets predictable. We don't want predictability. We want variety. We want to keep our students on their toes. So motivation is very important. We got to do these things. If the students are motivated, we got them on board. If they're not motivated, it gets harder to teach. It's already hard to teach. So, it's not an easy task. It's a daunting challenge. So we want to make sure that it's easier. Now, there are two ways. We've done thousands of needs analyses. I've checked thousands of needs analyses. And one of the things that students always want to do that motivates them, according to what they tell us, thousands of students, they all love games, okay? So these are kids, these are tweens, these are teens, and these are adults. Even adults, they all love games. Everybody loves games. Doesn't matter how old they are, okay? So you need to gamify your teaching, all right? Your teaching and your lessons. And something else that really motivates students is cultural personalization. Okay, so cultural personalization means you're making it easier for the students to understand the new language, to process the information, and to work with it and practice it and consolidate it because you're connecting it to their own culture. So let's take a look at an example here. Okay, so I know this is an international conference, so I've included famous people from all over Latin America. Now, I am based in Peru, so you might notice there are a couple of Peruvians here, but there are also people from other countries, okay? So here, this is obviously a basic level course. If you were in a country like Colombia, you would put Colombian celebrities and Colombian famous people. If you were in Mexico, you would do the same, right? So here what we want to do is we want to say, who are they? What do they do? So this is something where we practice the verb to be, we practice nationalities, we practice occupations, okay? So how about you type, if you guys can, type some example. Who are these people? So for example, type the letter and a colon, and tell me who they are, all right? So for example, to the left, if we're gonna write, let me write it here in the chat box. You can type it in the chat box, okay? His name is Paolo Guerrero, right? He is a soccer player, or if you want to use British English, a footballer. Yeah. He is Peruvian. He is in his 30s. Okay. So you want the students maybe to type, and you can divide your students into teams, Team A and Team B, who can give the most examples, the most sentences per person. And the team that gives the most correct answers for every sentence, they get a point. So this is a way to kind of relate it to their own culture, right? For example, letter D. Who would letter D be? Does anybody know? Who is letter D? Who's the person in letter D? And you guys can type. You can type in the chat box if you want. I think if it's enabled, you can type in the chat box. Okay. So we have people like Maluma here. We've got people like who else do we have? Okay, well, all right, we're a little shy today. That's okay. Don't be shy. I'm not evaluating anybody today. You're not under evaluation, and I can't see your faces, so don't worry about it. But you can again, for example, in the lower right-hand corner, that would be Juliana Oxenford. Now, her name is Juliana Oxenford. She is a journalist and a show host or TV anchor. Yeah, and she is Peruvian. She's in her, I think she's in her 30s. I'm not sure. Anyway, so again, you want the students to relate the new language to people they know from their own culture, from their own country. It can be food. We're going to see an example later with food, right? In terms of, food from your own country. How do you work with food? It's easier for a student to talk about, for example, ceviche than it is to talk about, a hot open roast beef sandwich, which if you're American, you know what that is. But somebody from Colombia or Brazil will not know what that is. Okay, so you want to use things from the student's own culture to make it easier to connect to the new grammar, the new vocabulary, or whatever you're teaching. It's schema theory. It's basic schema theory. All right, so Piaget, schema, or schemata, if you want to use the Latin for plural. You can also say schemas. It's easier to connect the new language to what students already know if they've experienced it, if it's from their own culture and their own country. Okay. Kinesthetic dynamics. Okay, so we have to make sure we motivate. We do everything we can to motivate our students, keep them happy, keep them engaged. That's number one. Number two, kinesthetic dynamics. What is the word that comes to your mind when you see the word kinesthetic? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? What is the first word that comes to your mind when you see the word kinesthetic? What is it? Okay, we're not typing today. Okay, so this is kind of a clue, right? You see this? This is the picture is kind of a clue. Okay, it gives us a little clue here. So what does the research say? I mean, they've done research, and the research says the brain falls asleep. Okay, falls asleep. It disconnects. The brain disconnects if there is little or no physical movement. So the day you go back to teaching, when they get the vaccines out and then everybody, we have 70% of the population who's overcome, the virus, and most people are vaccinated, then we'll start slowly going back to the physical classrooms. Then you'll know you have to keep your students moving, because otherwise the brain disconnects, it disengages. Students begin to, they begin to daydream, and they lose interest. They're not paying attention. They're there physically, they're there, and they're not there. Yeah, and you want them to be there both physically and mentally. Or if there is a low degree of interaction. So students have to interact, okay, in order to be able to stay sharp, so their attention spans are maintained. So the levels of attention are maintained. They're paying attention, they're engaged, they are willing to do the tasks, okay? So this is what the research says. So how do we do that? So, okay. Here we have a few statements. Well, what do you think? Which of these have to do with kinesthetics? What do you think? Number one, having students change partners several times. Okay. Now, this can be in a physical classroom or in a virtual classroom. What do you think? Is this kinesthetics, or would this be an example of kinesthetic dynamics? Number two, having students play charades up front to model new verbs. Now, if they're sharing their video, well, they can more or less do that too. It depends. Or they can use pictures. Yeah. Three, having as many students as possible ask each other questions in 2 minutes. So you're trying to get as many students to participate in as little time as possible. Okay, that's number three. Number four, have students do fact checking as soon as another student has answered a question. So immediately, well, do you agree? Is that correct? Is that true? If it's not true, give us the correct information. You want the students to constantly be interacting with each other, giving each other feedback. Is that an example of kinesthetics? And number five, having students run up to the board to write examples with the new grammar. Would that be kinesthetic dynamics? Well, so I'll give you 30 seconds. Take a look at that. Which ones are examples of kinesthetic dynamics? Which ones are not? All right, let's take a look. Okay, so we can see the answers here. All right, they are all examples of kinesthetic dynamics. So we want physical movement and we want a high degree of interaction. Okay, we want students to move and we want students to interact. We want both. Okay? Okay. So, physical movement. Stand up, don't sit. Circulate, physical activity. Okay? Get them to move around, talk to each other, interview each other, chat, have a conversation, hang out in the corner. If your classroom has the right furniture, they can hang out in different parts of the room. A chat circle or donut, right? Use the donut technique, right, to get them to work together. We might see something like that in a few minutes. Role plays up front, right? Doing role plays. Work around the chairs. Writing on the board, get the students to go up to the front and write on the board. All of that is physical movement. All of that is a lot of interaction between the students in your classroom. So that would be kinesthetics in terms of movement. And then interactions, you want timed participations. You want a lot of participation in very little time. So if you have 8 students in your class, if you have 15 students in your class, or you have 25 students in your class, you want 8 or 9 to participate in the first 2 minutes, and then you create another opportunity 5 minutes later. You want another 8 or 9 to participate, and you want them to participate in a very short period of time. I once got 12 students to participate in a minute and a half. This takes training, right? But again, we want everybody to speak and to participate as much as possible. Remember, we don't have that much time in class, so we have to make good use of it. We have to make good use of time. We have to be very efficient, very efficient. This takes practice on your part and takes training on the part of the students. We have to train them, okay? We have techniques such as cooperative learning techniques in the form of time, pair, share, or round robin. If I get volunteers, well, I'm going to demonstrate that to you in a couple of minutes. We're a little shy today, guys. We're a little shy today. Don't be shy. I need to hear from you. And also CITs, classroom interaction techniques, specifically student-to-student questions or student feedback. These are techniques and strategies that will get your students to interact a great deal in a very short period of time. We're going to watch some videos in a few minutes. Tech dynamics is the third of the 4 pillars, okay? So when you're talking about technology, I go back to Clifford. Clifford, he made a comment at a conference in 1987. He said, technology will never replace teachers, but teachers who use technology will replace teachers who don't. Okay? This was 33 years ago, and they were already wondering about the power of technology to replace teachers. Okay? At least we don't think so now. We don't think that computers will replace teachers completely. But certainly teachers who know how to use computers, especially now in the pandemic, we know if you don't know how to use video conferencing equipment, you're in big trouble. So we've had to adapt. The good thing is that the circumstances have pushed us to adapt, evolve, learn, and get better. That is always good for a teacher. That's a good way to, avoid burnout, because burnout is when you do the same thing, you get tired, you don't learn, you don't grow. The pandemic, if we're going to find something positive about the pandemic, it pushed us to move forward and to learn and to adapt to extreme and difficult circumstances and to become better teachers and to help our students also become better learners through technology. Okay, so that's the thing. Now, again, I'd like to see some participation, guys. I'd like to see some participation. Okay, so if we look at the quiz, let's take a look at technology, the role of technology. Okay, let's take a look at the role of technology, and we're gonna look at this and see to what extent it's true or not. Students interact more in a face-to-face class now. So in other words, If you're teaching online, if you're doing video conferencing, do you think that students don't interact that much? What do you think? Number two, students can learn without technology. Students can learn without technology. True or false? What do you think about that? Number three, students can cover more content with the textbook. And number four, students feel better or more comfortable in a classroom, a physical classroom, because now we have virtual classrooms. So what do you think about those four? Are they true or false? I'll give you 30 seconds. Take a look at them. I'll give you 30 seconds. What do you think about that? Okay, 20 seconds now. Yeah, it makes you think, huh? Kind of makes you think. Kind of makes you wonder. You got to think about these things. Now, obviously, you'd be more inclined to say yes to all of them. Let's take a look. Okay, number one. Now, obviously, we all have different positions. This will depend very much on the circumstances, but it is possible to be in the physical classroom and to have students not participate at all if the class is very teacher-centered. It's going to depend a lot on teacher, classroom management, the teacher, and the environment if students want to participate or not, right? And the activities. So it is false. You can actually have a virtual class with a much higher degree of interaction than the face-to-face class. Again, it all depends on the circumstances, but you cannot automatically assume that a face-to-face class is superior to a virtual class. Remember, before March, most of us were not teaching online. I mean, I was, but most of us weren't. And now we're learning. So we never really, thought. In fact, a lot of places still today, they're still teaching online like they used to teach in the physical classroom. And things have, it's a different approach. It's not the same. So if you don't go in with the right approach, then you're going to have some trouble. You're not going to take full advantage of the virtual class. Students can learn without technology. Yeah, sure they can. But why would you want students to learn without technology in the year 2021 when all of your students are, or most of them at least, the vast majority are digital natives, right? Students can cover more content with a textbook, not if you're using the right learning management system or digital platform for content. That can easily outperform a physical textbook because the students can cover the content. They'll have massive exposure to input in the second language. They can review it as many times as they want. So there's actually an advantage. That is false. There's actually an advantage to working with learning management systems and platforms. Students feel better or more comfortable in a classroom. What is that? What is more comfortable? That depends on what you consider to be more comfortable. Do you like to be around people? Yeah, okay, fine, physically, and then take a break and go out and hang out with your friends, especially if you're a little younger, all right? A little younger than I am. But then comfortable, how do you define it? Right now, you could be interacting with people. You get to know people online through the virtual classroom. You know who these people are. Maybe you're working on a project. So you meet with them, you get to know them, you make friends in a different way. And you're also seated in a very comfortable chair, maybe on a leather sofa. I don't know. You've got your coffee, you've got your snacks next to you. You're in a comfortable place. You don't have to worry about the traffic. 2 hours in traffic and rush hour trying to get to English class. You can learn from home, right? So again, that is not necessarily true. People might actually prefer to be at home because it's a lot more flexible. They don't have to be in commuting from work and then going to class. Okay, so there are a lot of advantages if we want to find them, if we want to see them. So, for example, reality check. I'm borrowing this from CNN. We are living in a world of technology, and most people are digital natives, which means they live and expect technology all the time. All right, so this is the reality. So we have to give them what they expect. We can't give them something that's opposite to what they live and experience each and every day. So if we're working with technology in the classroom, we want to have the right equipment, the large screen TVs or, multimedia projectors or the interactive whiteboards. Bring your own devices, which usually is a cell phone, right? You bring your cell phone. But at the same time, the students, depending on the circumstance, they might have their tablets. You might hand out tablets. And the teaching has to be adapted for the use of technology and an efficacious use of technology. The lab is always a good change of scenery. Not being in a classroom all the time. Again, variety is always good. You don't want to do the same thing all the time. So you want to take your students to the lab and practice online in the lab. Plus, you can focus more on specific things, and the connection is usually better because it's wired. So the internet connection, rather than the classroom is usually a Wi-Fi connection, usually. But the lab has a wired connection. And so it's usually a better connection, yeah? For example, when I was a director at another language center, before I worked on the previous one, I instituted something called the SAC visits. So this was a visit to the lab. These were lab visits, and the idea was to take students in certain courses to the lab on a mandatory basis so they could practice online and they could develop autonomous learning strategies and enjoy the notion of working on their own so that they could do it at home. That was the whole idea behind it. It was very successul. We even did a study. There was a study done, and it was published in a book that Dr. David Noonan and Dr. Jack Richards edited, and I wrote about the study, and it really did a lot to encourage extensive reading. So apps, students love apps, comfort zone, they're engaging. They're also very useful if you want to do some formative assessment. And of course, as I said before, you want to promote autonomous learning and project-based learning. So students can, through technology, learn how to learn on their own. They can deepen their understandings by exploring the topics that you cover in class on their own, and they can work together through projects. So that's always beneficial. All right, so let's take a look at some situations here, and let's see how technology can help us. Okay, let's take a look and see how technology can help us in these situations. Okay, I think most of you are probably connected through the YouTube streaming, so I won't be able to see what you're doing or what you're thinking. But that's okay. I'm going to imagine that you're working on these exercises, okay? All right, so a whiteboard. And now obviously I'm talking about the whiteboard on the video conference, right? When you're working through a video conference software like a Click Meeting or Blackboard Collaborate or GoToWeb or WebEx and Zoom, right? They all have an interactive whiteboard. So my question to you is, how can we check on our students' accuracy with the target language? Maybe grammar, maybe just taught a grammar lesson, or maybe they just saw a grammar lesson online. How can you get them to, how can you check on their accuracy using an interactive whiteboard? Okay. And I'll give you a couple of clues. One, it might have to do with writing. Two, it has to do with participation. You want to do something with the participation. And three, it's also something related to feedback. So what do you think? What do you think about that? And I'll tell you in about a minute. So let me give you a minute to think about that. How can we use an interactive whiteboard in our video conference class to check on our students' accuracy with the target language? Give you 30 seconds. Okay, we're doing well with time. Okay. So listen, I remember I went to observe a class a few years ago, and the teacher had taught the past simple, and I was observing the class, and the teacher had all the students, each one, he didn't leave anybody out. Everybody had to write an example, a personalized example of the past tense on the board. This was a blackboard. This is when people still use blackboards. And I could see that all the students had a solid understanding of how the past simple worked, because I could see the examples they were writing on the board, all over the board. So there were 25 examples on the board. Every one of them had written what you could see was a personalized example. They were all personalized examples. I could see the students understood how to use the past tense. And I could see that the teacher had been successful in teaching it. It was a very good class. And so that was evidence to me. Now, in a virtual class today, as opposed to many years ago in a physical classroom, you use the whiteboard, have all the students write their examples on the board, give each other feedback. They can do that now, especially if your classes are smaller. Like, for example, we work at NYC, we work with classes of maybe 8 or 9 students, at the most. So I could see if they type on the whiteboard, I could see what they're writing. I could give them feedback. They can give each other feedback, which is probably better than my feedback, because you want to make the class student-centered, and you also want to create opportunities for them to give each other, to speak English to each other, okay? Another situation, how can we give students precise feedback on speaking? Now, this is something that we can't do in a physical classroom. We can do it in a virtual class. This is an advantage. This is what I'm doing right now with students, and some of my instructors are doing as well. So how can we give precise feedback to our students on their speaking activities? Okay. Depending on, how we use the technology. How can we do that? Let me give you clues. It has to do with recording, has to do with analysis, and has to do with writing. So what do you think? How can we give our students precise feedback on their speaking? Okay, so listen, this is a lot of work, but then again, when have teachers not done a lot of work? All right, we do a lot of work. That's one of the things. I mean, we do a lot of work outside of working hours. We don't have working hours. We work in our classes and during our classes, and we work outside of class, and we work till late. So the good thing about, working online in video conference sessions, we can record our classes, and we can record our students' participations, and we can listen to them. We can watch the videos later, focus on specific students at different times. If you're not going to do everybody on the same day, you can do it, you could do the analyses in intervals. Listen to the students, listen to how they respond to the questions or to the tasks, do an analysis, take notes of specific comments they made, highlight specific errors, and then write a report to your students and send them the report. This will give them feedback on how well they are performing in relation to specific tasks and their ability to use specific language. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, it's a lot of work, but they will appreciate it. Of course, you can also give feedback during class and while they're performing, the corrective feedback, that's the standard procedure. But if you want to go an extra mile and you really want to help your students, you can give them personalized feedback in writing. They will appreciate it. Again, it's a lot of work, but then after you do it for a while, it's not that much. It's not that much. It's almost like correcting essays for a writing course. Okay. Okay, so let me move to the next topic, L2 output dynamics. This is the fourth dynamics, and then we're going to start moving into the final video. So we shouldn't push. This is what Stephen Krashen he mentioned as he was talking about optimal input. Optimal input is an evolved version of the original input hypothesis. He says we shouldn't push students to speak when they aren't ready. We should focus more on providing optimal input and letting them speak on their own. So whenever, after they get over the silent period, right? There's a silent period, right? Which I think is disappearing, this concept, because, today we don't really have real beginners anymore. We have few real beginners. Most of the people have been exposed to English in some way, especially the younger generations. But anyway, what do you think about this? Do you agree with it? So the lady on the right, she's wondering, well, what do I think? Is this true? Is this not true? Should we not push students to speak when they aren't ready? Yeah. Well, the actual fact is, that is true up to a certain point. The problem is that teachers often miscalculate or misjudge what it means to say students are not ready. So sometimes if we're not careful, we can underestimate our students' potential for speaking and producing language. So we inadvertently, unintentionally limit the opportunities for them to use the language. And then our classes become more teacher-centered. Our classes become more ridden with teacher talking time, which is what we don't want. We want student talking time. So we have to be careful. It is possible to provide optimal input and create opportunities for students to speak at their level. Okay, so we have to be very careful about this thing, about this idea, because we might misinterpret it, we might misapply it. I'm proposing the following to you as part of the L2 output dynamics. You know, we always tend to focus on something we call interactional language, but we also need to create opportunities for classroom language and meta language. So we must create opportunities for students to use English all the time. So let's do this little activity right here. Look at the situations below. Determine if the descriptions match the types of L2 output they are under. If not, put them in the right place. So for example, you can say IL or interactional language goes with A, or interactional language : A. It depends on what you want to do. So then take a quick look at the definitions. Do you think they match the terms? So take a quick look. I'll give you about a minute and a half for that. Okay, 45 seconds. Let's see what you can come up with. Again, the idea here is that you should create opportunities for all three: interactional language, classroom language, and meta language in your classes at all times. Most of the time, we only cover one of the three, and we use the textbook to do that. But we can create opportunities for the other two, and we should, because remember, we don't have, especially if you work in a country where English is not outside the door, it's not an ESL environment, you're in an EFL environment. And so you want to take full advantage of the class lessons. So let's take a look at the right answers. There we go. That is the correct configuration of the definition. Interaction language is what we usually cover, the communicative activities in the course book, or the ones that we create on our own so that students can practice their communication skills, speaking activities and pretending, doing role plays and that kind of thing. Classroom language is when we want students to, teach them expressions and things to say as they are interacting with each other, working with each other. So for example, when they're comparing answers, Jose, what is your answer for the number 2? And Jose says, my answer for number 2 is B. What you have? I have A. Why you pick B? So we're interacting with each other, right? Or I might say, teacher, I don't understand. Please explain again. Okay, Rodrigo, that's okay. I'll explain it again. So everybody listen. So Rodrigo, he wants a clarification, yeah? Maybe Emily says, teacher, can I go to the restroom, to the ladies' room, please? Sure, go right ahead. So these are the interactions that we have outside of, these communicative activities that we'll find in the textbook. We want students to use English as much as possible. So this is something that Dr. Ron Schwartz once called classroom interaction techniques. There are others, Murray and I forgot who else, but these are classroom interaction techniques are well known. And meta language is when we want the students to describe or explain how the language works. Okay, so for example, Leo, how do we form the past tense with regular verbs? Teacher, we form past tense with regular verbs put ed, final part. Very good. Yes, we have to put ed at the end. So here they're talking about how the language works. Okay. So we're going to watch two videos. I'd like you to tell me if you're watching interactional language, which is the typical communicative activity, if we're watching classroom language, or if we're watching meta language. Okay, let's watch the first video.
Okay guys, let's continue. Now you're going to look at the pictures you have here. Okay, then you're going to listen to the conversation, and then you're going to match the pictures with the days of the week. Okay? Gabriel, what do we have to do?
Okay, so first we'll look at the pictures, then we'll listen to the conversations, and finally we'll match the pictures with the days of the week.
Good, Gabriel. Please ask the same question to Sebastian.
Okay, Sebastian, what do we have to do?
Okay, first we have to look at the pictures, then we have to listen to the conversation, and finally we have to match the pictures with the days of the week.
Good.
Cassandra, what do we have to do?
Well, first we need to look at the pictures, then we have to listen to the conversation, and finally we have to match the pictures with the days of the week.
Very good, Cassandra. Thank you. Now, class, what do we have to do?
First we have to look at the pictures, then we have to listen to the conversation, and finally we have to match the pictures with the days of the week.
Very good. Excellent. Well done.
Okay, so what was that? Was that interactional language? Was it classroom language? Or was it meta language? I'll give you 10 seconds to think and give an answer. Process the info, get back to me right away. What do you think? 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay. So that was actually classroom language. That's a technique called comprehension checks for instructions. And the idea is that we want to make sure that students can restate the instructions given by the teacher in their own words. And then we want the whole class to do it, because if you call on 3 students, you don't know if the rest understand or not. You want to make sure everybody does. And if somebody looks like they're confused, then you call on them, or you work on the instructions again. So it's an opportunity to use English outside of the teaching, outside of the typical communicative activities that we might find in a typical course. Let's watch this class now. Tell me, is this, again, interactional language, classroom language, or meta language?
Okay, so now we've seen participial adjectives with both ed and ing endings. We're going to put them into practice in the next exercise, okay? So I want you to read the dialogue and fill in the blank spaces with the correct form of the adjective. Okay, but be prepared to justify your answers. Okay, we can start now. Okay, so let's see how you guys did in this exercise. Rodrigo, can you give me the answer to number 1, please?
Yeah.
What did you get and why?
The answer to number 1 is exciting because it's in reference to Las Vegas, and Las Vegas is a city, so we use ing.
Excellent, well done. So could you ask maybe Natalie some questions?
Yes, sure. Okay, Natalie, what do you have for number 2?
The answer for number 2 is direct because it's in reference to Mike. Mike is a person, so we use ed.
Okay, so again, is that 10 seconds? I'll give you 10 seconds to figure that out. Hopefully you didn't catch something that I just did. So I'll give you 10 seconds. If you notice on the board, the teacher wrote prompts, and the prompts were rehearsed before because you need to train students to do this. This is an example of meta language. So the students are explaining how they answered a certain way by explaining how the language works. And so obviously we want to train the students on how to speak about, for example, in this case, participial adjectives before I gave an example with regular verbs, whatever it is that they're explaining, form, meaning, and use. in terms of grammaring. So what are we want the students to tell us why they chose a certain answer, why the language works a certain way, or how it works a certain way. And that's another way to create an opportunity for students to use English, but we have to train them. This is not possible through divine intervention. We have to train our students. Okay. So I don't have any active participants here, so I was going to do a demo, but since we're doing the live streaming through YouTube. So basically here, again, we want to provide prompts. The minimal, we know when we're teaching online, we don't want to use the time that we have in a virtual video conference to explain grammar and to give long, detailed presentations and lectures. We don't want to do that. We want the students to work online and then to come to class, a virtual class, so they can put their language skills into practice through communicative activities. Okay. So this is what we want to do. Okay. And so we want to give them minimal prompts, but we want to give them helpful information, and we want to urge them on to reach the right way. Okay. So I want to get to the video. So I'm going to skip this a little bit, and we're going to watch a video. And I want you to tell me if you think the teacher complies with the 4 Ds. Okay. So again, remember, motivational dynamics, kinesthetic dynamics, L2 output, and tech dynamics. So of the 4, to what extent does this teacher comply? We're going to watch the video. It's not too long, for about 4 minutes. And then this is Rafael Rodriguez.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, teacher. How are you? I'm fine. Great. Okay, today we're going to be working with verbs, right? Verbs and examples of verbs. Let's begin with this. What is this verb?
I am eating a hamburger. Irina. I
Okay, so he's going to continue asking students, and they're going to continue giving him answers. So what do you think? How many of the 4Ds does he comply with? Does the class comply with? The lesson comply with? Okay? So is it kinesthetic, motivational, L2 output, or tech? How many of the 4 does he comply with? I'll give you about a minute. Okay? Think about it for a minute. Okay, so listen. So in this particular case, he actually complies with all four of the dynamics. Number one, there is kinesthetic dynamics because the students are really physically participating. There's a lot of TPR. They're dancing, jumping up and down, acting out the new verbs. There's video, the very good use of the sound, the music, and the multimedia projector. So the technology is covered. He's calling on students to give their own examples of the target language, which they do well without any scripts or reading. And of course, they seem to be very motivated and engaged. Okay, so I think it would cover all four in a very easy way and in a very short manner. Okay, so he did this in less than 5 minutes, and all four of the D's were covered, and he did really well. Okay, let's look at another video here. Again, how about this teacher? To what extent does this teacher comply with the 4Ds? Yeah. And we're going to jump straight to a point. Again, this is another one that I found on the internet. You'll find a lot of great classes on the internet. So let's see. And I'm going to move specifically to this.
Okay.
Point. Okay.
So from this text, I'm now going to divide you into 2 groups, okay? Into men and women. So you guys are the men, okay? And you guys are the women. Now, men, I'd like you to imagine that you are the shopkeeper, okay? And you want to create some questions that you can ask your potential wives when they come for your meeting, okay? I'd like you to write about 5 or 6 questions. Questions that you think would be good for finding out if this woman is the perfect wife for you. Girls, Pablo. Okay, I want you to imagine you've seen this advert, okay, and you're interested in this man, and I'd like you to imagine a new personality for yourself. So just try to think of perhaps some life experience, some characteristics, some hobbies, some skills. Maybe you're very good at cooking, for example, and maybe a new name or a new age that will attract the man, okay? So just 3 or 4 minutes, just try to think about who you are. Okay, so we've got our characters. Women, you know who you are. Men, you've got your questions. What's going to happen now is I'm going to get the men to come up and stand here, and I want you to make a circle, but facing out, okay? Women, I want you to also come up, but you're going to make a circle going around the men so that you're facing the men, okay, so that you'll be face to face with each other. So when you're ready, you can stand up. Let's have the men first. The men just come here. Women, choose a man and stand in front of him.
I know.
Right, okay. Okay, I'm just going to stand on this chair. Okay, just wait 1 second. Okay, so I'll clap my hands, and when I clap, you can start asking your questions. Women, at this stage, if you want to ask any questions to the man, for example, how much do you earn? Very important. You can ask these questions, okay? And when I clap my hands twice, you can stop and I will rotate you so that you can talk to another person, okay? Okay, ready? And go.
What is your name?
Susan. My real name is Tamema.
Okay, so again, here, if we look at the 4D paragon, kinesthetic dynamics, tech dynamics, L2 output dynamics, and motivational dynamics, how many of the Ds can you check off after watching very briefly this class? Okay, I'll give an answer in about 30 seconds. Okay, so here we don't see technology, but we do see motivation. The students seem very engaged, or they're having fun. There is a chat circle, or what you call a donut, inner outer circle, so the students can talk to each other and then rotate, change. Obviously, there's kinesthetics because there's movement, right? The movement obviously it keeps them on their toes. They're not sitting at the table or at their tables. They're moving around, and that keeps them motivated, moving. So 3 out of 4 is fine. 3 out of 4. We used to apply the 4D paragon where I used to work before, and so if a teacher had 3 out of 4, that would be fine as well. That could be an A-level class. Okay, so now let's get to the last class. Let's watch one more class, and then we can start wrapping it up, wrapping up the idea. So here we have a virtual class.
We're going to listen to Katia right now, and then you can also participate in a little bit. What do we have to do first? Let's see.
Okay, let me tell you that I don't know how to cook very well ceviche, but I am going to try to do that. Okay, first you need to cut into pieces the fish.
Okay.
You have to squeeze. Then you have to squeeze the lemon. Some lemons, or the lime that as limes. Mr. Mercado told us that it is limes. So you have to squeeze limes in a bowl.
Okay.
And you add the fish, the pieces of fish.
Okay. All right, Katia. Let's have somebody else to help you too. Maybe since you say that you don't know how to do this very well, but it sounds good. You sound almost like a pro. But let's see if somebody else can help you too. Let's see. Who would like to help Katia? Nancy? Ala? Which one of you would like to help?
Yes, in my case, first
Ala or Nancy?
Nancy.
Nancy. How would you help Katia? Yes.
In my case, first we have to wash the fish.
Okay.
And chop the fish into cubes.
Yeah.
Chop the fish into cubes.
Right.
And the next step is to place the piece in the container that you are going to use to serve the dish.
Okay.
And the following step is to mix the fish with the chopped yellow chili and coriander.
Okay. Coriander, yes.
Yes, and after that we should put the onion cuts into julienne strips.
Okay, in julienne.
Okay, all right, very good. So again, in this final video, how many of the D's can you check off? Can you check off motivational dynamics? Can you check off kinesthetic dynamics? Can you check off L2 output dynamics? Can you check off technology or tech dynamics? very quickly. I think you're getting the hang of this. 15 seconds. Well, actually, you can check off all of them. You don't get to see the later interactions, but the teacher gets everyone interacting with each other and collaborating towards the construction of the recipe for ceviche. And that was the purpose. It's a task-based activity so that the students can work together with the language that they saw in the unit on the platform. And then now they can apply it in a personalized way. So there's motivational because it's Peruvianized. There's a Peruvianized lesson. It can be Colombianized if you're Colombia. It can be Brazilianized if you're in Brazil. It can be Chileanized, excuse me, if you're in Chile, or it could be Mexicanized if you're in Mexico. So the idea is to work with content. Again, it's much easier for the students to construct a recipe if they're working with food from their own country. And so it's easier to relate the action verbs, the sequence markers, the nouns in the form of ingredients, etc. All of this language that they'll find on the platform, they can apply it here with this task. And so it's very practical and very useful for them, because eventually they're going to explain the recipe for ceviche to somebody from the UK or the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, or Ireland. I think I didn't miss any of them. Okay. All right, good. So the conclusion, the final insights. Okay, so teaching is daunting. It's very difficult. It's not something anybody can do. You know, all of us began as practitioners many, many years ago. I don't know if you remember your first class when you first taught, but it's a daunting task. It's a monumental effort that we have to make every time we get together with students. And it's not easy, and sometimes it's underappreciated, especially by people from other fields or people who just don't know what teaching is about. Motivation goes both ways. The motivation goes for students. They need to be motivated. We need to do everything we can to motivate them. But we also need to be motivated as teachers. And as I said before, there are two, because one of the biggest syndromes or diseases that teachers are at risk of catching is not COVID-19, it's burnout. In our field, it's burnout. And once you got burnout, it's very difficult to pull out of it. So in order to avoid that, you need to feel like you're growing, that like you're learning, you're making progress, and you are succeeding, and you are making people happy, and you are helping people reach their goals. That will keep you from suffering from burnout, okay? And so success, how do we do that? Well, this framework, the Paragon, the 4Ds, will simplify the work. It doesn't limit your creativity. On the contrary, it's a general framework. So if you keep do everything you can to motivate your students, do everything you can to keep your students moving around or interacting, do everything you can to help them produce, speak, and write, and do everything you can to use technology so that they can relate to your class and the learning experience a little better, then your work will be easier. You will be able to plan your lessons within the framework. Now, you can do whatever you want within the framework. Remember, we're not telling you to follow something step by step. We're not tying your hands. What I'm suggesting is that if you follow the framework, the 4 paragons, then your lesson planning will be easier and you'll have a greater chance of success. How you motivate your students is your choice. How you get them to move is your choice. How you get them to interact is your choice. How you get them to speak and write as much as possible is your choice. You decide how you will create those opportunities. But the framework will help you stay focused on what is most likely to make your lesson successful. Execution, and it's easier also for supervisors or coordinators because they can speak the same language as you if they use the framework. If you use the framework, they use the framework, everybody speaks the same language. One of the biggest challenges is when we have people evaluating us as teachers and they have different ideas, different concepts, different understandings of how the teaching and learning process works. But a model like this can keep everybody on the same page. Creativity, like I said before, creativity, not a straitjacket. You are free to choose to be creative, to innovate, to do what you think is best for your students, especially if you know what their needs are. If you're familiar with their needs, you've done your needs analysis or your needs analyses if you have several groups. Versatile, you can adapt very easily. And standards, this does not conflict with standards because your learning standards, if you're working with a Common European Framework, if you're working with WIDA, if you're working with ACFO, if you're working with whatever standard framework you're using, that doesn't change. The assessment process doesn't change either. On the contrary, it helps the students stay focused. So in general terms, what I presented today is a framework, a paragon that will help you be more successful, hopefully, if you take it into consideration. It's very easy to apply. It's the easiest thing in the world to apply. And it also helps you explain yourself when you are in a post-observation conference, because if you work within the framework, it's all easier. Now, I want to refer to something that John Fanslow said. 70% of what we do as teachers is based on habit, and 30% is on creative enterprise. I'm paraphrasing here, okay? The 30% creative enterprise, the 4D paragon, will help you to constantly evolve and improve your teaching. So this is something, and you want to make sure that the habits are good habits, not bad ones, okay? So we're not going to have questions. I just want to take advantage of this opportunity. If you go to the New York City Learning Solutions website, and here's the web, if you want more information, just sign up for information on opportunities for professional development and other services, testing and similar. And feel free to join our obviously free Facebook teachers page. Just go to the New York City Learning Solutions Facebook page, click on Visit Group, and it will take you to our New York City teachers community. Please join. You know, we have a lot of stuff there. You know, events are announced all the time. Contests, excellent articles, videos of presentations, etc. Learning tools and teaching tools, etc. are all there. So feel free to join us. We look forward to having you. And I believe that is it. Okay, so thank you so much. It was great to be here. If you would like any more information from NYC Learning Solutions, just write to info@nyclearning.com. Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure to be here. And again, thank you. Many thanks to Norma and Greenwich for the kind invitation. It was a great pleasure to be here with you this evening.
Thank you very much, Leonardo, for your time, for this amazing conference that you shared with us. Well, in my case, personally, I'm really surprised about one phrase, and I am going to repeat: technology will never replace teachers. But teachers who use technology will replace teachers who don't. Really interesting and really important. We have to think a lot about it. Don't forget tomorrow to connect also at the same time. Is going to be with us Robert Faison from New York. And the topic is also really interesting. Is corrective feedback in virtual age. So we're going to see you there. One more time, thank you very much, Leonardo.
Thank you.